The stars had always been cold and distant, but in the year 2347, they belonged to those who could reach them. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 60 years ago, and in the eyes of the ancient alien civilizations, they were still children learning to walk. Admiral Daniel Grant stood on the bridge of the USS Resolute, watching the blue glow of slipspace through the observation window. He was 58 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles. His uniform was simple, his medals few. He did not believe in showing off what he had done. He believed in doing what needed to be done. Behind him, the crew worked quietly at their stations. They were professionals, trained from childhood for moments like this. None of them spoke unless they had something important to say. That was the human way in space. "Admiral, we have received a transmission from Earth Command," said Lieutenant Amy Santos, the communications officer. She was young, barely 25, but her voice was steady. "The Volthrani have rejected all peace talks. They say they will accept nothing less than complete surrender of our colony worlds." Grant did not turn around. He simply nodded. "And our response? Earth Command has authorized full military action. We are cleared to engage." The Admiral let out a slow breath. He had hoped it would not come to this. He had spent his entire career hoping that humanity would never have to show the galaxy what it was truly capable of. But hope was a luxury that soldiers could not always afford. 60 years ago, when humans first made contact with alien life, there had been celebration across Earth. People believed they were entering a new age of peace and cooperation. They believed the universe would welcome them with open arms. They were wrong. The Galactic Concord was made up of over 300 species, most of them ancient beyond human understanding. Some had been traveling between stars for millions of years. They had laws, traditions, and hierarchies that humans could barely comprehend. And at the bottom of that hierarchy were the newcomers, the young species who had just learned to leave their home worlds. Humanity was placed at the very bottom. They were given trade rights, but limited ones. They were allowed to colonize certain systems, but only the ones nobody else wanted. They were tolerated, but never respected. The Volthrani Dominion was different. They were not members of the Concord. They were conquerors who believed that strength was the only law that mattered. For centuries, they had been expanding their empire, swallowing smaller species and enslaving entire worlds. The Concord had tried to stop them many times, but the Volthrani were powerful. Their ships were massive, their weapons devastating, their soldiers fearless. When the Volthrani turned their eyes toward human space, the Concord did nothing. Why would they risk their own ships for a species that had been among the stars for only 60 years? Humanity was on its own. High Commander Zorvax, leader of the Volthrani invasion fleet, had sent a message to Earth 3 weeks ago. His face had appeared on screens across the planet. A reptilian creature with scales, the color of dried blood, and eyes that burned with contempt. "Humans," he had said, his voice dripping with amusement. "You are small. You are weak. You have no place in this galaxy. Surrender your colonies, and we will allow some of you to live as servants. Resist, and we will wipe your species from existence. You have 1 month to decide." Earth's response had been swift. Within hours, the United Earth government had voted unanimously. There would be no surrender. There would be no negotiation. Humanity would fight, but the galaxy laughed. How could 40 human ships stand against 800 Volthrani warships? It was suicide. It was madness. Some alien commentators called it the most pathetic military response in galactic history. Others simply shook their heads and said that humanity would be remembered as a species too stupid to know when it was beaten. Admiral Grant had watched those broadcasts with a calm expression. He had said nothing. He had simply gathered his officers and told them to prepare for departure. now. As the third battle group moved through slipspace toward the Kepler 442 system, Grant allowed himself a small smile. The galaxy did not know humanity. They saw small ships and assumed weakness. They saw a young species and assumed inexperience. They did not understand what humans truly were. Commander Lisa Monroe entered the bridge. She was the captain of the destroyer USS Ironclad, but she had come to the flagship for a final briefing. She was 40 years old, with dark skin and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had served under Grant for 15 years and trusted him completely. "Admiral," she said, "the fleet is ready. All ships report full combat capability." Grant turned to face her. "And the crew? How are they feeling?" Monroe paused before answering. "They are calm, sir, focused. Some of them are young, and this will be their first real battle. But they understand what is at stake. They will not fail." Grant nodded slowly. "The Velthrani expect us to be afraid. They expect us to hesitate, to make mistakes, to break under pressure. That is what every enemy has expected when facing humans. And that is why every enemy has failed." He walked to the center of the bridge and looked at his crew. They were men and women from every corner of Earth, united by a single purpose. They were doctors' children and farmers' children, rich and poor, from cities and villages. But in this moment, they were all soldiers. "Humanity has been fighting since the first human picked up a rock and used it to defend their family," Grant said quietly. "We have fought ice ages, plagues, famines, and each other. We have survived things that would have destroyed any other species. And through all of that fighting, we learned something that the rest of the galaxy never had to learn." He paused, letting his words settle. "We learned how to win." Commander Monroe smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew what was coming and was ready for it. "The Velthrani have 800 ships," she said. "We have 40. The galaxy thinks we are going to die." Admiral Grant returned to the observation window. The blue light of slipspace reflected in his eyes. "The galaxy is wrong," he said. "We are not going to die. We are going to show them what happens when you threaten humanity. We are going to show them why our ancestors survived when so many others did not. And when this is over, the Velthrani will not be a threat to anyone ever again." Somewhere in the distance, the Kepler 442 system waited. 800 warships filled its space, confident in their power, certain of their victory. They had conquered dozens of species. They had never known defeat. They did not know that defeat was coming for them. They did not know that humanity's battle fleet carried weapons that had never been seen by alien eyes. They did not know that the small, quiet species they had dismissed as insignificant had been preparing for this moment for decades. They would learn soon enough. Deep within the carrier USS Valiant, Dr. Kevin Price walked through corridors that most of the crew did not even know existed. The walls were thick, reinforced with materials that could withstand a direct nuclear blast. The doors required 3 different security codes to open. This was the heart of humanity's greatest secret. And Price was one of the few people alive who understood everything it contained. He was 62 years old, thin and tired-looking, with white hair that had gone gray 20 years too early. He had spent his entire adult life working on projects that officially did not exist. He had missed birthdays, holidays, and funerals. His wife had left him years ago because he could never tell her what he did or why he was never home. He had given everything to his work, and now that work was about to be used for the first time. Walking beside him was Ensign Megan Drake, a young weapons technician who had been assigned to his team only 6 months ago. She was 23, bright and curious, with red hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She had top-level security clearance, but even she did not fully understand what she was about to see. "Dr. Price," she said as they walked, I have read the technical specifications for our weapon systems, but the numbers do not make sense to me. Our ships are smaller than Velthrani cruisers. How can we possibly match their firepower? Price smiled. It was a tired smile, the smile of someone who had carried a heavy burden for too long. That is the question, is it not? He said, the galaxy looks at our ships and sees small vessels with limited armaments. They assume that our weapons are proportional to our size. They assume wrong. He stopped in front of a massive door and entered a code. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a chamber filled with technology that looked like it belonged in a science fiction story. Welcome to the Prometheus program, Price said. Megan's eyes went wide. She had heard rumors about Prometheus, whispers in the corridors of military academies, stories that most people dismissed as fantasy. But here it was, real and terrifying. The chamber contained rows of massive cylinders, each one glowing with a faint blue light. They were antimatter containment units, and each one held enough destructive power to crack a planet in half. The Prometheus cannons, Price explained, are not like any weapon the galaxy has ever seen. Most species use plasma weapons, laser systems, or kinetic projectiles. They are effective, but limited. Our cannons fire concentrated antimatter shells wrapped in magnetic containment fields. When they hit a target, the containment fails and the antimatter reacts with normal matter. The result is complete annihilation at the atomic level. Megan swallowed hard. How powerful are they? A single shot from a Prometheus cannon can destroy a Velthrani battleship. Their shields, which are considered among the strongest in the galaxy, offer no protection whatsoever. Antimatter does not care about shields. It simply erases whatever it touches. They moved deeper into the facility. Price showed her the targeting systems, which were controlled by artificial intelligences so advanced that they could calculate millions of possible outcomes in the time it took a human heart to beat once. He showed her the stealth technology, which bent light and sensor waves around human ships, making them invisible to any detection system known to exist. We call it the Shade Protocol, Price said. When activated, our ships become ghosts. The Velthrani could fly directly past us and never know we were there. Their sensors will show empty space where our fleet should be. Megan shook her head in disbelief. How long have we had this technology? We began development 50 years ago, shortly after first contact. The government realized very quickly that the galaxy was not a friendly place. We needed an advantage, something that would make other species think twice before attacking us. So we started building. He led her to a final chamber, smaller than the others, but somehow more intimidating. Inside was a single console, surrounded by holographic displays showing tactical data. This is the Wrath Doctrine system, Price said. It is the brain of our military operations. When we enter combat, this AI takes control of every weapon, every shield, every movement of every ship. It coordinates our fleet with perfect precision, finding weaknesses in enemy formations and exploiting them before the enemy even realizes they exist. Megan stared at the console. An AI controls our weapons? Is that safe? Price nodded slowly. Safer than you might think. The Wrath Doctrine does not have desires or ambitions. It has a single purpose: protect humanity. It cannot be hacked, corrupted, or turned against us. We spent 30 years making sure of that. They stood in silence for a moment. The weight of what Megan was seeing pressed down on her. She had always known that humanity had secrets, hidden programs that kept the species safe. But she had never imagined anything like this. Dr. Price, she said quietly, why did we hide all of this? If we had shown the galaxy what we could do, maybe the Velthrani would never have attacked us. Price turned to face her. His eyes were sad, filled with a wisdom that came from too many sleepless nights. Do you know the history of our species, Ensign? Real history, not the sanitized version they teach in schools. Megan nodded. Some of it? We had wars. Many wars. We had thousands of wars. We killed each other for land, for resources, for ideas, for gods. We developed weapons that could destroy cities in seconds and diseases that could wipe out millions. We came very close to destroying ourselves, not once but several times. He paused, gathering his thoughts. When we finally reached the stars, we hoped things would be different. We hoped we could leave our violent past behind and become something better. And in many ways, we have. Humanity today is more peaceful than it has ever been. But we did not forget what we are capable of. We did not throw away the lessons we learned through centuries of blood and fire. He gestured at the weapons around them. These are not tools of conquest. They are tools of survival. We built them hoping we would never need them. We hid them so that the galaxy would not fear us, so that we could prove we were peaceful, so that we could earn respect through cooperation rather than intimidation. Megan understood. But the Velthrani did not give us that chance. No, Price said. They saw our small ships and our quiet diplomats and thought we were prey. They thought they could take what they wanted and face no consequences. They were wrong. Back on the bridge of the USS Resolute, Commander Nathan Cole was running final simulations. He was the tactical officer, responsible for coordinating the fleet's combat operations. He was 45 years old, with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen enough danger to know that panic never helped. The simulations all ended the same way. No matter how he adjusted the variables, no matter what strategies he gave the Velthrani, the result was always total human victory in under 4 minutes. He reported his findings to Admiral Grant. Sir, every scenario shows the same outcome. Our weapons are simply too advanced. The Velthrani cannot counter what they cannot see or understand. Grant listened carefully. And our casualties? None, sir. In every simulation, we lose 0 ships and suffer 0 injuries. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. I wish it could be different. I wish they had listened when we offered peace. But they did not. And now they will face the consequences. He looked out at the stars rushing past. Prepared the fleet. We arrive in 6 hours. The Kepler 442 system was beautiful in a cold and distant way. Its star was smaller and redder than Earth's sun, casting a dim orange light across the planets that circled it. The third planet, a rocky world called New Haven, was home to 3 million human colonists who had built cities, farms, and dreams in a place far from their ancestral home. They were peaceful people, scientists, and builders. Families who wanted nothing more than to live quiet lives under alien skies. Now, their skies were filled with death. High Commander Zorvax's armada spread across the system like a disease. 800 warships, each one a monument to Velthrani power, hung in the darkness above New Haven. The smallest of them was the size of a human sports stadium. The largest, Zorvax's flagship, the Crimson Fang, was nearly 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could reduce a city to ash in seconds. The colonists had been given 1 hour to evacuate. Most of them knew there was nowhere to go. They gathered in their homes, held their children, and prayed to whatever gods they believed in. On the bridge of the Crimson Fang, Zorvax watched the planet below with satisfaction. His scales gleamed under the artificial lights, and his tail swished slowly behind him as he contemplated the conquest to come. "My lord," said one of his officers, a younger Velthrani named Korath, "our sensors have detected human ships approaching. They will arrive from slip space within the hour." Zorvax made a sound that might have been laughter. "How many?" 40 vessels, my lord. Destroyers, cruisers, and 1 carrier. 40. Zorvax turned to face his officer, his eyes gleaming with amusement. They sent 40 ships against 800. Do they wish to die so badly? Korath hesitated. Perhaps they hope to negotiate, my lord. By time for evacuation. There will be no negotiation. There will be no evacuation. These humans will learn what happens to those who defy the Dominion. He turned back to the viewport. Let them come. Let them see our might before we crush them. Far away, at the edge of the system, space itself seemed to tear open. Blue light spilled from the wounds in reality as 40 human ships emerged from slipspace in perfect formation. The USS Resolute led the fleet, followed by destroyers, cruisers, and the massive carrier USS Valiant. On the bridge, Admiral Grant watched as his displays filled with data. 800 enemy contacts spread across the system in a standard defensive formation. The Velthrani were not worried. Why would they be? The numbers were overwhelmingly in their favor. Admiral, said Lieutenant Santos, we are receiving a transmission from the Velthrani flagship. Put it through. The main view screen flickered, and Zorvax's face appeared. He was smiling, if the expression on a reptilian face could be called a smile. Admiral Grant, Zorvax said, his voice carrying the arrogance of someone who had never known defeat. I am impressed that you came. Most prey runs when they see our fleet. But you are brave. I will give you that. Brave and foolish. Grant did not respond immediately. He simply looked at the alien commander with an expression that was impossible to read. You have one chance, Zorvax continued. Surrender now. Deactivate your weapons and power down your engines. Your crew will be taken as slaves, but they will live. Your colony will be absorbed into the Dominion. Resist, and you will all die screaming. The bridge was silent. Every crew member waited for their admiral's response. Grant clasped his hands behind his back. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. High Commander Zorvax, I have studied your history. I know what the Velthrani have done to the species you have conquered. I know about the slave camps, the mass executions, the worlds you have burned. I know that you believe strength is the only thing that matters. He paused. You are wrong. Zorvax's smile faded slightly. Wrong? We have conquered 200 star systems. We have crushed every enemy who has ever stood against us. What do you know of strength, human? I know that true strength is not measured by how many you can destroy, Grant said. It is measured by what you are willing to sacrifice to protect those you love. I know that the people on that planet below are counting on us to save them. I know that every man and woman in this fleet is prepared to give their life for that purpose. He took a step closer to the screen. But I also know something else, Zorvax. Something you do not understand. Humanity did not come here to negotiate. We did not come here to posture or threaten. We came here to end this war, today, in this system. Zorvax laughed. It was a harsh, grating sound. End it? With 40 ships? You are insane. Perhaps. Grant's voice did not waver. But I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that I gave you a chance to walk away. I want you to remember that you chose this fate. He straightened his uniform. This is Admiral Daniel Grant of the United Earth Navy. You have attacked our people. You have threatened our worlds. You have made a mistake that cannot be undone. We do not come to negotiate. We do not come to posture. We come to end this. He made a cutting motion with his hand, and the transmission ended. On the Crimson Fang, Zorvax stared at the blank screen. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, exactly. He had never felt fear. But something else, something he could not name. My lord? Korath asked. Your orders? Zorvax shook off the feeling. All ships, prepare for battle. Destroy them all. Back on the Resolute, Grant turned to his crew. They looked at him with trust, with determination. With the quiet confidence of soldiers, who knew exactly what they were about to do. "Commander Cole," Grant said, "activate the Shade Protocol." Cole's fingers moved across his console. Shade Protocol engaged. All ships reporting full stealth capability. One by one, the 40 human ships vanished from every sensor in the system. Where moments ago there had been a small fleet, now there was only empty space. On Velthrani ships throughout the Armada, officers stared at their screens in confusion. The human ships had simply disappeared. No explosion, no slip space jump, just gone. Where are they? Zorvax demanded. "Find them." "We cannot, my lord," Korath said, his voice trembling for the first time. "Our sensors show nothing. It is as if they were never there." Zorvax slammed his fist against his command console. "Impossible. Ships cannot simply vanish. Increase sensor power. Find them." But there was nothing to find. The human fleet had become ghosts, invisible and silent, moving through the Velthrani formation like shadows through darkness. On the Resolute, Grant watched the enemy ships on his tactical display. The Velthrani were panicking, firing randomly into space, trying to hit targets they could not see. "All ships," Grant said. "Weapons free." Commander Lisa Monroe, aboard the USS Ironclad, heard the order and felt a chill run down her spine. Not from fear, but from anticipation. She had waited her entire career for this moment. "Prometheus cannons ready," she said. "All batteries targeting the nearest Velthrani cruiser." She took a breath. Fire. The first shot of the battle flew across the void, invisible and unstoppable. It struck the Velthrani cruiser dead center, and for a fraction of a second, nothing seemed to happen. Then the ship simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no fire, no debris. The antimatter did its work too, completely for that. One moment there was a warship crewed by 3,000 Velthrani soldiers. The next moment there was nothing but a faint shimmer of energy that faded as quickly as it appeared. And then, across the system, 40 human ships opened fire at once. The war had begun. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not a battle. It was not even a massacre. It was something that the galaxy had never seen before and would never forget. It was the complete and total erasure of an armada that had conquered 200 star systems. The Wrath Doctrine took control of every human ship the moment the first shot was fired. The artificial intelligence processed information faster than any living mind could comprehend, coordinating 40 vessels with perfect precision. Each ship knew exactly where to go, exactly when to fire, exactly how to avoid the desperate counterattacks of an enemy that could not see them. On the bridge of the USS Ironclad, Lieutenant Commander Chris Lawson watched his weapons console with a mixture of awe and horror. Numbers scrolled across his screen, counting destroyed targets. The counter moved so fast that it was almost a blur. "Target destroyed," the ship's computer announced. "Target destroyed. Target destroyed." The voice repeated those words over and over. A mechanical prayer for the dying. Commander Lisa Monroe stood at the center of her bridge, watching the carnage unfold through tactical displays. The Velthrani ships were firing in all directions, their plasma cannons lighting up the darkness with green and orange fire. But they were shooting at nothing. Their sensors showed empty space, and empty space was all they could hit. Meanwhile, the human fleet moved through their formation like wolves through a flock of sheep. The Prometheus cannons fired again and again, each shot finding its mark with terrible accuracy. Velthrani battleships, cruisers, destroyers, all of them fell the same way. One moment they existed. The next moment they did not. 30 seconds, Monroe said quietly. 62 ships destroyed. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. She had trained for this. She had believed in human strength. But seeing it demonstrated so completely was something else entirely. On the Crimson Fang, High Commander Zorvax watched his empire crumble. His tactical display was filled with red markers, each one representing a ship that had been destroyed. The markers appeared faster than he could count them. Shields to maximum. He screamed. All power to weapons. Fire everything. We have nothing to fire at, my lord. Korath shouted back. His composure had shattered. Fear had replaced confidence in his eyes. Our sensors cannot find them. We are blind. Zorvax grabbed a young officer by his uniform and threw him against the wall. Then find them with your eyes. Look out the viewports. They must be somewhere. But there was nothing to see. The human ships were invisible in every spectrum of light. They moved like ghosts, like demons, like the nightmares that Velthrani children were told to keep them obedient around the flagship. Ships were vanishing in clusters. A squadron of destroyers disappeared in a single moment. A massive battleship, one of the pride of the Velthrani fleet, simply stopped existing as 3 Prometheus rounds struck it simultaneously. Captain Laura Simmons, commanding the cruiser USS Thunder, led her ship directly into the heart of the enemy formation. She was 38 years old, a decorated veteran of 3 previous engagements, and she felt no fear. Fear was a luxury she had abandoned long ago. Wrath Doctrine, give me targets, she said. The AI responded instantly, highlighting 47 Velthrani vessels within optimal firing range. Simmons smiled grimly and gave the order. Fire all batteries. Continuous fire until targets are eliminated. The Thunder's Prometheus cannons erupted in a cascade of destruction. Ship after ship fell, their shields worthless, their armor meaningless against weapons that unmade matter itself. In 90 seconds, all 47 targets were gone. On New Haven, the colonists had gathered in their shelters, waiting for the end. They could see flashes of light in the sky, the distant glow of weapons fire. They held their children and whispered prayers and prepared to die. Then someone noticed something strange. The flashes were not getting closer. They were not spreading across the planet like the colonists had expected. Instead, they seemed to be contained to a single area of space, flickering and dying like candles in the wind. A young woman named Rachel looked up at the sky through a shelter window. Her daughter was asleep in her arms, unaware of the danger that surrounded them. What is happening up there? She whispered on the Resolute. Admiral Grant watched the tactical display with an expression that was impossible to read. The counter showed 200 ships destroyed. 300. 400. The numbers climbed faster and faster as the Wrath Doctrine optimized its targeting patterns. 2 minutes, Commander Cole reported. 512 Velthrani ships eliminated. We have sustained no damage. Grant nodded slowly. He had known this would happen. He had run the simulations 1,000 times. But knowing something and seeing it were different things around him. His crew worked with quiet efficiency. There was no celebration, no cheering. They understood that what they were doing was necessary, but that did not make it easy. Somewhere out there, hundreds of thousands of Velthrani soldiers were dying. They were the enemy, yes. They would have killed every human on New Haven without hesitation. But they were still living beings, and their deaths weighed on the conscience of every human in the fleet. On the Crimson Fang, Zorvax had finally accepted the truth. His armada was being destroyed. Not defeated, not damaged, destroyed completely. In less than 2 minutes, he had lost more ships than the Velthrani had lost in the past 100 years of warfare combined. All ships retreat. He ordered. Fall back to the secondary rally point. Emergency slipspace jump. But the human fleet had anticipated this. The Wrath Doctrine had calculated every possible escape route and positioned ships to block them. When Velthrani vessels tried to power up their slipspace drives, they were destroyed before the drives could activate. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. There was only death, coming from every direction at once. "My lord," Korath said, his voice barely a whisper, "we cannot escape. They have cut off all retreat paths." Zorvax stared at his tactical display. 600 ships gone. 650. The numbers kept climbing. His mighty armada, the force that had conquered worlds, was vanishing like morning mist under a rising sun. "What are they?" he asked. His voice had lost its arrogance, lost its confidence. He sounded like a child asking about the monster under his bed. No one answered. No one could answer. On the USS Valiant, Dr. Kevin Price stood in his laboratory, watching the battle through a data feed. He had built these weapons. He had spent decades perfecting them, hoping they would never be used. Now they were being used, and the result was everything he had calculated and nothing he had been prepared for. Ensign Megan Drake stood beside him, her face pale. "Is it always like this?" she asked quietly. Price shook his head. "This is the first time. We have never used Prometheus weapons in actual combat before. We hoped we never would. How many of them will survive?" Price was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with a weight that would never fully lift. "None of them. The Wrath Doctrine does not allow enemies to escape. It calculates that survivors might return for revenge, might build new weapons, might pose a future threat. So it eliminates all threats completely." Megan looked at the data feed. 700 ships gone. 750. "We are not just winning," she said. "We are erasing them." "Yes," Price said. "That is exactly what we are doing." At 3 minutes and 42 seconds, the last Velthrani ship exploded. The Crimson Fang, Zorvax's flagship, was struck by a dozen Prometheus rounds simultaneously. The great vessel crumpled inward on itself and simply ceased to exist. High Commander Zorvax had no final words. He had no time for final thoughts. One moment he was alive, filled with confusion and fear, and the terrible realization that he had made the worst mistake in the history of his species. The next moment he was nothing at all. Admiral Grant looked at the tactical display. Where 800 warships had been, there was only empty space and the faint traces of antimatter reactions. "All ships report," he ordered. One by one, the human vessels checked in. The USS Ironclad, undamaged. The USS Thunder, undamaged. The USS Valiant, undamaged. Every ship in the fleet was intact. Every crew member was alive. Grant let out a long breath. "Stand down from battle stations. Disengage the Shade Protocol. Signal New Haven that they are safe." On the planet below, the colonists saw the flashes stop. For a moment, there was only silence and darkness and the terrible uncertainty of not knowing what had happened. Then the transmission came through, broadcast on every frequency. "This is Admiral Daniel Grant of the United Earth Navy. The Velthrani fleet has been destroyed. New Haven is secure. You are safe." In shelters across the planet, people began to cry. They held each other and wept with relief and disbelief and something that might have been hope. Rachel looked down at her sleeping daughter and smiled through her tears. "We are safe," she whispered. "We are safe." The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours of the battle, every major civilization knew what had happened at Kepler to 442. The story was so unbelievable that many species thought it was propaganda, a desperate lie created by humans to delay their inevitable defeat, but the evidence was undeniable. Observation satellites from neutral species had recorded everything. Long-range sensors had detected the energy signatures of Prometheus weapons. And most importantly, the Velthrani Dominion had gone silent. 800 warships, destroyed in under 4 minutes. 0 human casualties. The numbers did not seem possible. For species that had watched the Velthrani conquer world after world for centuries, it was like being told that a child had defeated a giant with nothing but a stick on the capital world of the Galactic Concord. The assembly hall was filled with representatives from over 300 species. They gathered beneath a dome of crystalline glass, surrounded by holographic displays that showed footage of the battle. The footage was played again and again, as if repetition might somehow make it comprehensible. The Telvari ambassador, a tall being with silver skin and 4 eyes, watched the footage with an expression of deep unease. His species had been among the first to join the Concord, millions of years ago. They had seen empires rise and fall, species evolve and die. But they had never seen anything like this. "This cannot be accurate," he said to his aide. "The humans must have had help. Some hidden ally, some secret weapon provided by another species." His aide, a younger Telvari who had spent several years studying humans, shook his head. "The analysis is clear, Ambassador. Those weapons are of purely human design. They developed them in secret over the past 50 years. Impossible. 50 years is nothing. Our species has existed for 2 million years, and we do not have weapons like this." "No," the aide agreed quietly. "We do not." The assembly was called to order by the High Speaker, an ancient being whose species was so old that no one remembered their original name. They were simply called the First Ones, and their word carried weight throughout the galaxy. "We are gathered," the High Speaker said, their voice echoing through the hall, "to discuss the events at Kepler 442 and their implications for galactic peace. The human delegation has requested permission to address the assembly." A murmur ran through the crowd. Humans had never addressed the full assembly before. They had always been represented by junior diplomats at minor meetings, treated as barely relevant newcomers who had nothing important to say. But everything had changed. Ambassador Paul Martinez walked to the central podium. He was 50 years old, a former soldier who had transitioned to diplomacy after the First Contact War 30 years ago. He moved with the careful precision of someone who was very aware that every eye in the galaxy was watching him. He looked around the assembly, meeting the eyes of beings from hundreds of different worlds. Some looked at him with fear, some with curiosity, some with the beginning of respect. "Distinguished representatives," Martinez began, "I come before you today not as a conqueror, but as a messenger of peace. What happened at Kepler 442 was not our choice. We did not seek war with the Velthrani Dominion. We offered them every opportunity to resolve our differences peacefully. They refused." He paused, letting his words settle. "I know what you are thinking. You are wondering how a species as young as humanity could develop such devastating weapons. You are wondering why we hid them. You are wondering if we are a threat to galactic peace." He took a breath. "Let me tell you about humanity. We are a young species, yes. We have been among the stars for only 60 years. But our history stretches back far longer than that. For hundreds of thousands of years, we lived on a single world, fighting for survival against predators, diseases, ice ages, and ourselves." He activated a holographic display that showed images from human history. Wars, plagues, disasters, and destruction. Cities burning. Mushroom clouds rising. Millions dying. We nearly destroyed ourselves many times. We developed weapons capable of ending all life on our planet and then pointed those weapons at each other. We stood on the edge of extinction and stared into the abyss. The images shifted, showing recovery, rebuilding, progress. But we survived. We always survived. And through all that suffering, we learned something that has become the core of who we are. We learned that survival is not guaranteed. We learned that peace is precious but fragile. We learned that the universe does not care about our hopes or dreams or good intentions. He turned off the display. When we reached the stars and joined the Galactic Concord, we hoped that things would be different. We hoped that the galaxy would be a place of cooperation and mutual respect. And for the most part, it has been. We've made friends among your species. We have traded with you, learned from you, grown alongside you. His voice hardened slightly. But we also saw the Velfrani. We saw what they did to weaker species. We saw the slave camps, the destroyed worlds, the endless conquest. And we knew, deep in our souls, that someday they might come for us. So we prepared. He looked around the assembly again. The weapons we used at Kepler 442 were built over 50 years. We hoped we would never need them. We hoped that the galaxy would remain peaceful, that the Velfrani would never turn their attention to our little corner of space. We were wrong. He stepped closer to the gathered representatives. I want to be very clear about something. Humanity does not seek conquest. We do not want an empire. We do not wish to rule over other species or impose our will on the galaxy. All we have ever wanted is to live in peace, to raise our children, to explore the stars, to learn and grow. His voice softened. But we will defend ourselves. We will protect our people. And if anyone threatens our existence, they will face the full strength of human determination and human ingenuity. Not because we want to fight, but because we will never allow ourselves to be victims again. The assembly was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The Velfrani Dominion has surrendered unconditionally, Martinez continued. Their remaining forces have laid down their arms. The species they enslaved are being freed as we speak. The war is over. He took a final breath. I ask you, distinguished representatives, to accept this peace. I ask you to understand that humanity wants nothing more than friendship and cooperation. But I also ask you to remember what you saw today. Remember that we are not the weak, naive newcomers you thought we were. We are survivors. We are fighters. And we are here to stay. He bowed his head slightly. Thank you for listening. The silence lasted for what seemed like an eternity. Then, slowly, the Talvari ambassador began to applaud. The sound was soft at first, but it grew as other representatives joined in. Within moments, the entire assembly was applauding. A thunderous acknowledgement of humanity's place in the galaxy not far away. On a small planet called Earth, people watched the address on screens, large and small. They gathered in living rooms and stadiums and city squares, watching their ambassador speak for their entire species. In Montana, Admiral Daniel Grant watched from a wooden chair on the porch of a small house. He had retired immediately after the battle, refusing all honors and celebrations. He wanted only to be alone, to process what he had done and what it meant. His wife, Margaret, sat beside him. She was the same age as him, with kind eyes and gray hair. She had waited for him through decades of service, never knowing the full truth about his work. Now she understood, and she loved him anyway. Do you think they will leave us alone now? She asked. Grant was quiet for a long moment. For a while, he said. They will be afraid of us. They will wonder what other secrets we have. But eventually, that fear will fade. Eventually, someone will test us again. And when they do? Grant looked up at the stars. They seemed different now somehow. Less cold. Less distant. When they do, we will be ready. We will always be ready. That is who we are. On New Haven, the colonists had begun to rebuild. The fear of the past few weeks was fading, replaced by gratitude and hope. They knew how close they had come to annihilation. They knew that only the strength of their fleet had saved them. In a small shelter that had been turned into a temporary school, children were learning about the battle. Their teacher, a young woman named Grace, showed them pictures of the ships and the officers who had commanded them. "Remember these names," she told them. "Admiral Grant, Commander Monroe, Captain Simmons. These are the people who saved your lives. These are the heroes who protected your families." A little boy raised his hand. "Were you scared, Miss Grace?" Grace thought about the question. She remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the prayers she had whispered in the darkness. "Yes," she said honestly. "I was very scared, but I also had hope. I knew that somewhere out there, good people were fighting for us. I knew that humanity would not abandon us." She smiled at her students. "And that is the most important lesson you can learn. We are never alone. We are part of something bigger than ourselves. When one human is in danger, all of humanity responds. That is what makes us strong. Not our weapons, not our technology, but our love for each other." The children nodded. Too young to fully understand, but old enough to remember Dot and Across the Galaxy. In capital cities and remote outposts, in ancient halls and newly built colonies, beings of every species looked at humanity with new eyes.